All right. Professor Patrick Yenchen, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about the US-China rivalry and the great power competition that is ongoing in Indo-Pacific region, and not just Indo-Pacific region. I think in global politics, this is one of the most important issue that has been under discussion. All the academic scholarship has been discussing, the policymakers, the leaders have been focusing on this one. And to discuss this topic, we have Professor Patrick, and he's my mentor, he's my friend, he's my brother, and he's my teacher as well. And thank you so much for joining us. And I would give the floor to you. And I want you to talk about China's perspective and how China perceives the international politics, the United States, and the regions that are important for China. And please, the floor is yours. I would not stop you to, talk about it. Please.
No, don't make me wrong. I would like you or anybody in the room to interrupt me, to stop me by raising questions or comments. I would love this kind of form of a seminar. We call it a seminar, so it should not be a kind of a monological, presentation. Like I speak only while you are with all your ears, but make a silent kind of a platform. No, I don't want that. I really want to extend my appreciation and also expectation from the audience, from the esteemed and good students of your institute. I know that you're at the top of the.
We can do it in this way. We can do it in this way. You can talk about topic like 45 minutes, and then we can have a question and answer session.
Sure. Yeah. It might not be really 40 or 50 minutes that long, but I would really rather share some of my thoughts, somehow random thoughts, over my readings, observations, and also discussions and findings inside Chinese academic circles. In Chinese academic circles, we have been discussing mostly China-US relations as one of the major background or playground to exercise knowledges, to find new knowledges, to extend and debate about the future of the world, especially when the world is more or less defined by this kind of this tendency between China and the US, how these two countries can manage their relationship and to which direction these two countries gonna move forward.
Yep.
From my observation, I gradually, pay more attention to the state building or the domestic growth, domestic changes somehow within these two countries, because what really matters is not really about diplomacy or international relations per se in its narrow scope, but a broader scope, how the change within these two countries, these mega countries, right? China and US both has a massive population and landscape that underpins the power and the strength, the potential to be a superpower, to lead the world somehow in one way or another. So naturally, we should pay more attention to domestic politics or domestic situation, domestic developments of respective countries, China and the US. I believe most of the Chinese scholars believe that the things are no more the same in the past 5 or even 3 years, especially after the pandemic. The pandemic officially being called to an end in China by the end of 2022. That was roughly 1 year ago. While the whole world was actually celebrating the lift of the quarantines or lockdowns rather a little bit earlier, 1 year or 1.5 years earlier. China was conservatively, stringent in managing COVID. It's like a wakening up, actually. By the end of 2022, the first wakening up call for all Chinese is not international politics, but the FIFA Soccer World Cup, when millions of Chinese, while having high fever, like I do, while watching the game between Argentina and France, We're having cold, high fever while cheering for Argentina or France. That was kind of a wake-up call because it was so symbolic and memorable of the winter of 2022. When we suddenly realized that China was in a more or less a strange world at the time. Strange world is that um, uh, it is so strange that we are not accustomed to the things we used to have prior to the pandemic of how the U.S. has been treating China. We were fighting a kind of a trade war, right? Starting from 2017 or 2019. When we wake up by the end of 2022, we realize we're in the Cold War. No more a trade war, but a Cold War. Because the pandemic lockdown symbolizes a kind of a segregation of the two competing camps, right? Like exactly like that in the resemblance of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and US. We were cut off so long for more than 2 years inside China without substantial interpersonal or cultural or business relationship with the outside world. We realized that we are certainly in a different era at the moment. And 1 year on, especially in the very turbulent year of 2023, we didn't really see that much of going in a better way. It was rather going downhill between China and the US, between China and the Western countries, associated with the Russo-Ukrainian war, with multiple conflicts and situations in terms of trade, in terms of security, mostly security in the moment. So the Chinese scholarship and the Chinese civil society certainly viewed the U.S., viewed the Western world in a very, I won't say complete, in a very different way, and the hostilities, the resentments, the kind of a grief were certainly growing inside China towards the West, because we are simply not satisfied. We're somehow angry with the way the approach the U.S. and the Western countries has been adopted to deal with us. That is very certain. For any of you who are being speaking or reading Chinese languages, you can certainly sense very easily the change inside Chinese societies. I used to study public diplomacy. I'm still following public diplomacy at some points. It is I won't say painful, but it's really worrisome for me to view this kind of downhill tendency of how China is viewing itself, its relationship with the West, with the United States. At the same time, we also realize the United States' relationship and its position in the world's situation also is changing. And most of Chinese, even most of the Americans, I believe, or most people around the world, I believe, probably also in Pakistan, the hegemony of the U.S., or somebody would rather call it the U.S. imperialism, is certainly in decline, right? Simply, U.S. has has lost or loosened the grip over its leverage or influence globally, symbolized by the withdrawal, the retreat from Afghanistan, and also the things onwards. So the situation is certainly changing and making a lot of people think alternatively how they're going to deal with a post-American world, borrowing the phrase from Zachariah 10 years ago. The post-American world referring to a world or an era or a world that the U.S. has lost its substantial imperial or hegemonic impacts on the world, while a lot of people certainly and naturally look east and see what China would do in this situation. So a competition, voluntarily or not, China was involved in this kind of a great power rivalry or competition. And this rhetoric of competition was further reinforced by the American elites, both Republicans and Democrats. All of them talk about the rise of China, the threats, and also the possible, gloomy future of how the U.S. might lose somehow in one field or another to the Chinese supremacy in technology, in military, and in economy, whatever. So this has fueled to a kind of self-fulfilling prophecies of Thucydides trap. Thucydides trap was a popular phrase back in 5 or 6 years ago, but now a lot of people already, even though we don't really reiterate or talk about this phrase, but sincerely, a lot of people buying it, are believing that we're moving towards the abyss of the Thucydides trap, even inside China.
All right.
So that is one situation we had to face. It is a dangerous slope we're experiencing because somehow international relations is not merely about hard power. And the soft power, people's way of thinking is shaping to a great extent of how states behave, how decision makers behave. I'm personally inside this kind of how to say unsettled political atmosphere, political circumstances. I smell through my application for a program, through my teaching, through my dialogue with my coworkers, that the Chinese leadership, the Chinese elites, Chinese ruling, the Communist Party is leading the cadets, the circles. They are discussing how China gonna approach and deal with the post-American world. Personally, I believe this is worrisome because if you presume that a country is in decline, the superpower is in decline, it will naturally encourage you to take some bold steps. The bold step referring to the things which we have already observed in terms of Chinese military buildup, Chinese overseas encountering and sometimes collision, verbally mostly, with the Western diplomats. And also, it is increasingly salient and obvious that China is simply changing its way of presenting itself by asking for more, acquiring for more positions or benefits from the West, or more deliberate expression of its self-interest in international relations. It is certainly, prove that China was wakening itself up to claim the position of the next superpower or the next, or we might more or less call it no more a revolutionary country. It's no more status quo country.
Let me add some points here
Yeah.
in your fascinating conversation and fascinating picture that you have portrayed. China sees the United States right now and how we are going into the abyss of Thucydides trap. So I would like to add some things, and I would want your comments on it. That if we look at the U.S. perspective, they look at China as a rival, and the current rivalry is in the tech dominance, right? The chip industry, and then the Taiwan issue, where the United States is adamant of supporting Taiwan, and even though they in the past we saw they paid less attention towards it, but now they have or pushing this agenda on Taiwan. Then see that the military is growing on both sides, and in United States posturing towards China is also has changed the Indo-Pacific policy, and then the alliance formation to contain China. It's causing up with the India and Quad, and that we see that the United States is trying to contain China or is working on a policy where it is containing China. So what I want to ask you here is that in this great power rivalry, do you see a coexistence of these two great powers in the future? Or do you see one or the other coming on top of these global affairs?
That's interesting, but also a very core question for not only China, US, but also for the rest of the world, I believe. I would say that eventually all countries have to coexist. It's inevitable.
That's
It only matters
that's what was discussed in November meeting between President Xi and Biden.
right. Right, exactly. President Xi would like to reiterate that the Pacific is big enough to host the two great nations, China and the U.S. There's no dispute. There's no questioning that the two countries gonna coexist. But what we care about is under what conditions these
Yeah,
two
under
countries
what
coexist.
exactly the conditions?
Right. Under what conditions? So on a very on a strict security sense, that it is somehow fortunate that U.S. and China was one ocean apart, and this one ocean happens to be the biggest one on Earth.
Yeah,
On this perspective, I believe that President Xi Jinping did really withhold its reason that he literally means that the Pacific Ocean is truly the biggest one that can certainly, in his
it's too much
theory,
space to too much space
too
for
much space.
both countries to coexist.
It's not like that Atlantic or Indian Ocean.
Yeah,
The Pacific is simply really big. For any delivery and employment of military or even ballistic assets,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it will be take really long time. It gives the rival, the other party, enough time to respond. So any kind of a hostility movement will be really costly, given the geographical
Yeah.
situation. So I believe on this side, it is somehow positive, and there's no substantial buffer or substantial, how does it competing ground? I would say the buffer zone, but competing ground like Europe between Soviet Union and US in the
Yeah,
1970s, right?
absolutely, absolutely agree.
Well, we have Japan, Korea, Australia is really far away. India was, on the same continent with China. So naturally, I would personally doubt whether Quad gonna stand, to fulfill its mission as it proclaimed to contain China or maintain the U.S. or so-called rule-based order in Indo-Pacific. That was highly questionable because no countries, like even the United States, has no resource to fund and support such a massive, employments and design.
All right. My next question, not question, but my comment that I would want you to talk on is that if you remember the last time we had a conversation, we talked about that China is now becoming a major player in terms of security of international world or in international politics, where China would
Yeah.
emerge as more responsible country. And you said just watch in near future there would be many things happening. And we saw how China brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and how when this Israel-Palestine conflict started, uh, China played a very important role and responsible role. Talked about the two-state solution, and for the ceasefire, it is adamant of at pushing this support. And now I would want to talk about that. In the past, we have seen China as more, you may say, not interfering into domestic politics of other countries and not taking, the role of a security guarantor or playing a mediatory role between, in a conflict between two countries. However, the you may say the near past or the contemporary politics, we have China posturing itself as a security guarantor or a state which is trying to solve the conflicts that have not been solved by the United States. So do you think China is posturing and showing that we are now at the center of the world state and we can take this responsibility and we can be a role model for countries in terms of solving the conflicts?
Okay.
Or we can be a role model great power that is going to behave differently like previous great powers?
Okay, that's interesting questions. Whether China gonna repeat or rewalk what the Western countries has been in terms of the how to say the rules of the games, how China going to manage or govern somehow, even to a certain extent, the global affairs? There's indeed a saying back in 2 years' time when the CCP has a 20th Congress. China, according to President Xi Jinping, is moving toward the center of the world stage. Literally, China is moving towards the center of the world stage. But somehow, because of the language, and also the translation barriers, I believe that the things should be somehow understood in a slightly different way. China's moving towards the center of the world stage doesn't mean China has to, grab the steering wheels and give orders to the rest of the world. But what you should do, what China will gonna change the world somehow. It's more or less like saying that China gonna perform economically better, so that the future to become a robust engine of the economic revival of the world economy in the future. Because in Chinese political rhetorics, the Chinese leadership has been always very careful in phrasing itself and try not to send wrong signals or raise misinterpretations from the rest of the world. But somehow these misinterpretations cannot be avoided. It's happening all the time. I simply want to clarify that China still somehow very prudent. I use the word prudent. You might not necessarily agree with me, but compared to the Western countries' records in history, China has been way prudent as a major country in the world. We even try not to use the phrase in the political document, great power. You never find great power in Chinese political document. We call it major country, or the countries who take a lot of shares economically in the world. This prudency also indicates that China has a limited ambition from top down, that China doesn't really want extra or bonus beyond the capacity of a major country. Simply saying that China never wants to claim superpowership. That's very important statement. Despite the fact that a lot of scholars and peoples talk about China being a superpower in the world, Chinese government never use the term, never, and will never use the term in the future. So that is a very key difference. When we try to understand the foreign policy of a country, we also have to pay attention not only to these important, but also have to pay attention to documents, its words, its phrase, because somehow, nevertheless, these two phrases and these are somehow interacting. They are constraining itself with each other. Back to the way of whether China going to perform the way the West countries has been performing, I would rather say no. Even if China has the capacity, they have the resources it has to manage or interfere or intervene in major international conflicts or international disputes, we would do it in a more constructive way. Because simply the Chinese government has been very cautious, careful, or prudent to exercise its power, despite whether they have the capacity. And secondly, it is the conditions, which is quite different from 19th century, 20th century, that holds any superpower or major countries back from its unrestricted exercise of power, because we have seen enough lessons from the Western countries past, even including the so-called invited empire, the United States. The US has been quite confident and proud of their foreign policy history. Saying that we're the benign superpower or even benign empires. We were in Afghanistan, we're in Iraq because we're invited. We're trying to liberate people, even though it is complete rubbish according to international law. International law prohibits the exercise of military intervention in any forms without authorization. China was certainly not moving towards that kind of a step.
I have an assumption here. My argument here, I would like you to discuss or maybe talk about it, that we have seen after the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been investing massively in many countries, especially Pakistan. CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is the flagship project. Don't you think when China would have its stakes in many countries like Pakistan, and China would have to intervene or would have to engage with the countries because it has stakes there. So
Mm.
don't you think it would be a traditional way of a great power behaving the same way that all great powers have done when they had their interests? Why the
Mm.
United States have this leverage to intervene into many countries or intervene into domestic politics in the name of
Mm.
human rights or in the name of their national interest as the leader of the free world? So don't you
Mm.
think when China has its stakes in many countries,
Mm.
China would
Okay.
be behaving the same way as all great powers have done?
I already put it in my last comment that even the China have the capacity to intervene or interfere, China would not have to make the step of no return because China have learned the lessons, firstly, from the Western country, and secondly, of the breach and ultimately bury the legitimacy of the Chinese international position. That will be hugely costly for China's international position. China has been chanting non-interference and peaceful coexistence, the five principles of peaceful coexistence for 70 years. If China ever dared to breach that and make a very deliberate and you know, a very aggressive and also questionable move that is breaking its own promises and commitments, then China's international reputation is going to be collapsing because China is going to lose one of its most important diplomatic pillar, that is the support and sometimes unconditional support for the third world country or developing countries, right? It is hard to imagine China ever send military troops to Europe or to America. But certainly, even without the invitation, China would be rather convenient to send troops to Africa, to the Middle East, to Latin America, right? But
Yeah.
somehow, once China make the steps that gives enough accusations and also pretexts for the West, I mean, China has offering a free target, the soft belly for the West countries to attack themselves. So eventually, in the long run, out of strategic thinking, it will be really not cost and efficient. So that is certainly China will try everything to avoid, even if to a certain point, China has to make certain moves. It has to be again prudent, cautious, had to be rephrased in the terms of to completely neutralize it in a way that is more acceptable for the locals, especially, and also for international law. Otherwise, China would never dare to do it because simply you cannot betray your own faith. That will be the final, the most lethal blow to your international ambition.
All right. Wonderful, fascinating conversation. Now, I would like to ask my PhD students if they have question. Please, I'll allow you to ask this question directly.
Yeah, read one question already.
Yeah. First, we're gonna answer. We're gonna talk about. Yes, please, Ahsan, please.
Good morning, sir. Firstly, thank you very much for such an elaborate talk.
Thank you. Welcome.
It was quite comprehensive and concise. And this US-China relationship, hot and cold, it is all benchmarked on a sense of competition as well as interdependency between the both great powers. Sir, I'll just draw certain comparisons and then I'll seek your comments on what would be the likely way forward and where the Chinese thought process is going to lead as far as setting up a new world order is concerned. So just allow me a couple of minutes to give a little preamble and then we can move forward. Firstly, I would like to give a comparison of the military built up on both the sides, and especially with respect to the power projection which both countries, from the military point of view, can generate. Despite the fact that if you see in terms of number of vessels, the Chinese Navy has more ships as compared as to the US Navy. But if we take it a parity in terms of the power projection capability, the US outruns China in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to the number of SSBNs, their missile carrying capacity, and also the number of aircraft carrier which can project considerable power over distant areas, including land. Then comes to the regional political map. While US continues to build bases like in Japan, Korea, takes up the case of Taiwan, has a base in Hawaii, building up in Philippines, South Korea. The partnership and alliances like AUKUS and Quad, which is also referred before as well, and getting into foundation agreements with India like Limoa, Comcasa, Becca. Whereas for China, if you see in terms of in particular any military alliance or partnership, it doesn't seem to exist. While contrary, within the region, China experiences difficult diplomatic relations with Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, even India creates those problems. Toklam Valley issue is in front of us. There are a number of regional issues on islands, especially like Partley, Parcels, Docomo. And at the same time, a very big contrast which I see is that while China has recognized UNCLOS and US has not, both are doing contrary to what the actual rule position is. China proclaims for the 9-9, while the US upholds the UNCLOS and defends its right of for freedom of navigation. In this this whole milieu, when we see and how the US is building up, while against the BRI, they went for initially the Blue Dot network, and then it was then converted into P3W. China had a great role to play, especially when it comes to Afghanistan. When the US withdrew, so far nobody has actually agreed upon the status of the Taliban government in Afghanistan, and also China played a great role in bridging the gap between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, with all this potential and capacity which China actually sees, and I also would like to make a comment here. If you look into the history, there hasn't been any superpower in the world, whether it was the Romans or the Ottomans or even any other empire, if you see, which has assumed the power or the center stage and ability to assert and project power without applying the military as its tool. So how do you think that the China's role of peaceful coexistence, not going into any kind of military adventurism, would allow China to get into that role of equating or surpassing what position US implies? And is there a possibility of what we saw erstwhile NATO versus Warsaw Pact? We may see something of NATO versus another China military bloc. Just your comments, please.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your really clear and comprehensive outline of Chinese security concerns and also its potentials, and raise a core concern of how China is going to use its power or manage to design its future, right? Its relationship with the West, or whether we're going to repeat what the Cold War has been tragically set, in the past, of the confrontation of the two military organizations. My answer will be simply no. There will be no Warsaw Pact, because I partly answered that because the China has to maintain restraint from exercising its power, especially hard power, by asserting and supporting and consolidating its long time-honored commitment to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Because if China can do that, it's going to savage and sabotage and sacrifice every resource, most of the resources Chinese diplomacy has in the past 70 years. It simply cannot do that. It's too affordable. That is not to be one of the options. China indeed has a great potential, like you said, to be become one of the most important mediators of international conflicts, and also potentially to be a projected power by sending its naval forces to Indian Ocean, to even further beyond. Like China has been presenting and maintaining its military, its naval deployment ever since 2011 or 10, and by claiming by safeguarding the trading routes free from pirates. But indeed, I believe that China has faced a seemingly very difficult situation while the US is consolidating its alliance networks in East Asia, in Asia Pacific, in Indo-Pacific, whatever terms you like to prefer to use, while China simply have none. But it doesn't really give China the hard time, because I always believe that maintaining and supporting an alliance is really difficult and expensive. Expensive to make because most of the so-called allies, which claim to build the alliance based on values, but history already told us the values means nothing in terms of solid interest, of national interests, territorial interests. So the maintenance of the alliance systems, while provoking tensions in the region, especially in South China Sea and Taiwan, like the US has been doing in the past, will become increasingly difficult and expensive when China is getting stronger and powerful. When China was actually Taiji its powers by not confronting the US, tooth to tooth and fist to fist, like sending troops, sending naval forces, sending submarines, sending nuclear submarines to confront the US missiles and submarines. While on the other hand, China was trying to invite everybody to part of these major networks, and by getting richer and making monies together, so-called BRI. BRI is a soft punch that is practiced in Taiji with the United States, because simply the US cannot really breach through China's BRI, simply because the US has no money. You try to bite off Chinese partners and allies, you have to equally possess such valuable assets and input to buy them off. But this is something US cannot afford. While the most important, I believe, China as the biggest industrial manufacturing country in the world, we by this time, to wait out the US to spend everything they have in this region, strategic resources and financial resources per se, because China has basically everything that the world needs. That's why is one of the core reasons why a lot of countries are coming to China for help, for consultancies, and also for markets. That is naturally because China produces stuff. When US was the #1 manufacturer country in the world, it naturally attracts the world attention. It can make money out of conflicts. Now, simply, historically speaking, the term is on China. China simply has to stay quiet and do its own business by not making stupid mistakes. But China will certainly so-called win over the competition, all the rules of game set by the US. It would be stupid for China to play the American game. While you talk about China's naval expansion, the naval expansion for China is past decade or two, 1.5 decades, 15 years of expansion is, I won't say astonishing, but really, even for Chinese, is really surprising. But somehow I do realize that the military build-up, especially for naval build-up, it has its own logic. It's kind of different from land forces or for air forces. Naval forces has own, build-up cycles. China has been building hundreds, if not dozens, of major battleships, frigates, and destroyers in the past decade, because China simply has a lot of deficit to fill. I remember I was kind of a fan of the military. I've read a lot of military magazines in my middle school years, like 20 years ago. We were impressed by the fact that China was way out of the league compared with the superpowers like Soviet Union and US or Russia. Even we are significantly way behind Japan's naval forces in East Asia. 20 years ago, China only has major 4 destroyers purchased from Russia, really expensive warships. Now we have dozens of the most cutting edge vessels in the way, but doesn't mean that China going to continue to build up its new ships in the coming years, because industry outputs needs a circle when the dock is opened, when the factory is on the run, it has to fill a substantial amount of order, and they're going to close up for sure by leaving maintenance behind. That is military. So I would not venture into seeing how many ships China going to continue to build, but certainly we're going to be very soon to see the end of this kind of expansion circle. So that China will use what we have to restore the balance of military of the naval forces with the U.S. and its allies. U.S. military forces in East Asia, you should never forget about the equally powerful assets of South Korea, Japan, Australia, who are close allies of the United States. So still, so far, China cannot say overrun the U.S. in terms of naval power in the China region. Never say about the fighting, the combat experiences of comparatively new navy built up in China.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
probably
my students sitting here. I have some questions here. Then we will go to the chat and we will get some questions from there as well. So the question is about the accomplishment of BRI and expansion of BRICS. That will it bring a significant change in international system or international order? We've seen that many new members are becoming the part of BRICS, and Belt and Road Initiative is on the go. So what change it could bring in international order, and how do you see the role of these two institutions in terms of dominance in international order of China's dominance, we would say?
Well, my answer is both yes and no.
All right.
Let's just take the BRICS country as an example. Firstly, we don't really have to give too much expectations for BRICS. BRICS is essentially an economic forum. The focus on infrastructure, focus on the financial corporation.
SCO had different aspirations. Asif, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Different aspirations.
It is an organization, that groups a bunch of countries who claim themselves to be emerging markets, but vastly different, right? And very, very different, given the domestic and legal system, political system, economic foundations, dramatically different. So naturally, from this beginning, it has more troubles than its promises. It has to deal with its domestic, smoothing their corporation, building up brand new platforms. It means it's going to cost a lot. And expansion will make it even more complicated. Just take the EU, for example. EU certainly is a different case, but EU starts with the Coal and Steel Commission, right, of 6 countries, and its expansion took a rather modest and a slow step by incorporating one country after another after stringent scrutiny and evaluation of progress, right? Yes. It doesn't really just take in all members without respect, without. Naturally, it's a serious project for a regional corporation organization. So and certainly I know that BRICS and also the organizations that China has been involved in is not really trying to recreate a kind of a bloc or a regional political organization, or even a kind of a EU styles of institution. But China certainly has its own concern. We don't really that give too much expectations for those organizations, but certainly we'll rather try to maximize its influence and impacts. Trying to say that, see, out of IMF and World Bank, you have more choice and you have more hope. And this choice and hope will bring a lot of, will build up your international prestige, reputations and prestige. This is kind of a soft asset, which is prerequisite for a country to grow mature and act responsibly to deal with different, claims, different pursuits, and even clashes of interests inside certain regions in world politics. Just take the SCO, for example. China has been one of the most important initiators for establishing SCO, but China has been also very careful and also prudent to try not to make the SCO a kind of a comprehensive or security-oriented organization, but rather make it a kind of a modest, sometimes lukewarm organizations that tolerates differences or even conflicts between member states. So by doing this, I still would rather like to argue that China is playing Taiji. China believes that you should not easily fall in your rival's game. If you follow their games, they can simply beat you and overrun you with their own leverage, but not your leverage. China's leverage at the moment is manufacturing, its capacity to influence and also to change the world, even for other people in the world, to improve your living standards.
I would jump in here, and I would request if you could explain Tai Chi to my students, please.
Okay, Tai Chi is it's a traditional Chinese Kung Fu. Yeah, it's Chinese Kung Fu. I don't practice Tai Chi for a long time.
It's all right.
But its basic philosophy is that it's not like a boxing game. Boxing game has 4 strict rules. Like you have to knock down your enemy somehow as a venture game, and how many points are gained depends on how many punches you give different parts of the body. On the face, you might get 5 points. On the neck, you get even higher. On the chest and the belly, you get lesser. But Tai Chi is different. Tai Chi aims strategically in the long run over the ultimate victory over your enemy, despite seemingly like when you practice Tai Chi, you seem like always down the defensive. Yes. Right? If you see the movies, like you seem like always so slow and so soft, you seem to be acting like a coward. Are you in slow motion? No, Tai Chi is not like that. Especially for China and also for someone who is physically weak or physically infeasible to meet a stronger and muscle-some challenger, you practice Tai Chi by winning out his strength and exhausts all his energies and try to wait patiently when your enemies make mistakes. So you know your chances, where your chances are. So that's Tai Chi. That is Tai Chi. Tai Chi, but essentially means that you have to be patient. You have to be strategically patient to wait and to a moment that that it's your time, to fight back.
Wonderful.
Because the one who wins is the one who laughs at last.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Tai Chi. I believe Chinese play Tai Chi.
You explained it wonderfully.
Thank you very much. I try my best.
Yeah, I remember every day in the morning, very early morning, like
Thank you.
right after dawn, many you may say Chinese old people I used to see practicing Tai Chi
in the park. Yeah, on the streets,
especially in front of UE as well.
Right. Actually, Tai Chi was part of my high school curriculum. We were practicing for a while. Somehow it is not easy for adolescent to master the principle and the philosophy of Tai Chi. So in that sense, strategic speaking, Chinese is much older than the Western countries, to know how to hide itself and how to wait out until the last moment. So in that sense, China will never be Russia. Somehow, Russia simply cannot wait back to.
Russia is a bear. Russia is a bear. When you poke the bear, it hits back.
You expect what would happen, right? The bear gonna crunch and take over you.
We have a question from Safia Mansoor. She is our PhD student, and her question is about As you mentioned, the US-China are moving towards abyss of Thucydides trap. What is your view on imminent conflict between both countries, or especially while keeping into consideration the dynamics of 21st century, notably economic interdependence? So basically, let me give a historical perspective to this question. In history, World War One, we see Britain and the Germany heavily interdependent economically, but the security preferences, overtaken or overtook the or superseded the economic concerns or economic interdependence. And the similar situation is right now between the China and the United States. Both countries heavily interdependent economically, right? But at the same time, there are security concerns on both sides. And
Right.
how do you see this situation unfolding?
Okay. There was never such a case like that between China and the US. On the one side, we are the security rival, military rival, and we're debating whether we are having a Cold War, because the Cold War definition is also debatable at the moment. On the other side, there has never been two superpowers have so close economic relations, right? Economic relations, cultural and people-to-people connections with each other. So simply the relationship between China and the US is really way complicated. In my understanding is that we have been overwhelmed by the negative news and negative reports every day on how the US has been sanctioning Chinese corporations, Chinese government officials. On the other side, China, US aircrafts are exercising kind of following standstills over South China Sea. These news are simply too much for us to blind some of the key drive, between the two countries. I mean, on a societal levels, the two countries are maintaining or increasingly to reconnect with each other. At this very moment, I believe the Chinese U.S. government has issued more documents to reopen the airlines as being interrupted by the COVID. Right, we're opening more and resume more airlines between China and the U.S. so to facilitate the free travel of people from both countries. And on the other side, I believe that more Chinese are very interested in going to the United States for study, for business investments opportunities, etc. So the normalization of the two societies simply to be overshadowed by these very serious and negative political developments of these two countries. So this is very strange. But how to understand it? And my understanding for such similarly paradoxical situation that actually is very simple, that the China and the US are highly independent on each other socially, economically. This is simply way too costly for the two parties to ring the final bell by going into a hot war or a real conflicts that are being redeemable. But this is not going to happen for sure, because this is not what I say, what I believe. If this is a situation believed by most of the people, especially by the people of the social elites of the peoples, like in 2023, in the past year, I've counted, I see almost every month and every week, the top leadership of US business, including the CEOs of Apple, including Elon Musk, those business leaders are visiting China on a regular basis. They're visiting their own factories. They are seeing Chinese top leaderships. They took visits of the local plants, and they drafted new agreements with the local governments in China, in Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, everywhere. So we have seen a new wave of normalization of the two societies, but not necessarily two governments, but new societies.
Yes. All right.
So
question
have
is,
to be patient.
you beautifully
Yeah.
answered the question. For my audience and participants, let me say one thing. This webinar is about China-US relations. So we are not going to discuss the domestic questions that are being asked here. There are 2-3 questions that are specifically on domestic issues in China. So we're not going to discuss those. We are specifically focused on, the questions that are related to both countries. So the next question is about, it's by Hassan Zubairi. He's a security studies MPhil student. He talks about that China's soft advancement with its economic initiatives and incentives reaching as far as Eastern Europe and Africa, South America, and in the ASEAN and Indochina, Indochina regions. Can this be considered as a Chinese response of creating the economic buffer zone against the US or the West economic interests? So,
Okay.
uh,
Let me think for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
This is a question actually beyond my knowledge base. I have to reorganize my thoughts. Yeah, economic initiatives, incentives, Chinese response creating economic buffer zone against the US.
I will start the discussion and then we can jump in and talk about it. What he actually means is that we see under the Belt and Road Initiative, and especially the China's rise, we saw China going in many countries and investing huge amounts of money and infrastructure projects. It started all around the world. And he's saying that, is it a buffer zone against the economic interests of the West? My argument here would be that China did go there, but actually what happened, the war on terror and other things we saw, the Western economies, they created a vacuum for China to fill in. United States was too busy in war on terror in Afghanistan and in Iraq. That was the time. Then we talk about the rise of China. We had Brent Levomac, we had Barry Buzan, international security we discussed at our university. Mearsheimer came there. So that was the time when China was talking about the peaceful rise of China, because that was the time of a vacuum that was created by the Western countries, because they were too busy in destroying and disrupting the peace of the world, where China found opportunities to engage countries economically. So it's not something against the interests of Western economies, but an opportunity to engage economically other countries and have the future future of shared shared community, the future of shared community, the slogan that President Xi has. So please.
Okay, I believe you have made a really comprehensive, modest statement over. I 80% or even 90% agree with you. To make a further compliments, I would like to say that China's engagement economically with the rest of the world, especially developing countries, is out of its own economic spiral. Because when your economic and industrial output reaches certain levels, there has to be a way out.
Exactly.
I won't say the expansion, but it is internal drive, willing or not, for the Chinese government, to facilitate Chinese corporations to go abroad and to invest, to build infrastructures, and to engage and invest in developing countries, because it would apply to any countries who have the capacity, to go overseas. That is one claim. It so happened that China's economic reform has reached a turning point roughly by the 2010s. The 2010s is critical. If not, China's economy would go imploding itself domestically. Has to do that. And it so happened that the Western countries has left a huge deficit of investment, of fundings for the needs, the the need for developing countries to for their own infrastructures and economies. So it is certainly like the Chinese leadership claim a win-win situation. It so happens it's a godsend. It is make everybody happy, except for the West when they try to make and claim it to be a death trap. Because traditionally, I believe the Western countries always viewed one country's economic might with its economic, military, or security might overseas. There's no separation because historically, Western countries going overseas with commercial ships with soldiers and guns, right? So gunboat diplomacy, gunboat trade.
Yeah.
While China has no such mentality or design.
And from economic perspective, from economic perspective, we can look upon that the West has been in recession. The Europe has been in recession. Their economy has been stalled. They did not have much to invest in other countries. China came in with the huge amounts of money and sources, and it gave those countries who needed. And we have seen the policies of Western countries. Whenever they go somewhere, they are more hawkish in terms of getting their own demands being fulfilled rather than helping the countries, right? Where China went there, China said, take the money and invest wherever you want. You need infrastructure, build infrastructure. Latin America, for example, China has invested heavily in technological advancements. In Argentina, they have built a space station, satellites for the. So that is how I see it, and I don't think it's a confrontation of economic interest of the Western countries. Western countries actually provided space for China to fulfill. So
right.
So
that's the condition. Otherwise,
that's how it works. International system is you get the opportunity, you maximize on the opportunity.
Right.
So
exactly.
I would end our conversation on this question that I would want to ask you is. We have talked a lot about the great power rivalry and how conflict can, spiral. But there are many, aspects and realms where both countries as great powers can cooperate. And my question to you is that where do you see China and the United States cooperating for the betterment of international global order or international system?
So could you repeat the question, please?
What are the fields or what are the aspects where US and China can cooperate and there can be a cooperation for the betterment of international security or economics or environment or any?
Okay, my answer will be a little bit surprising for you probably because a lot of people might think of like climate change or the countering global crimes, organized crimes, as claimed in the UNDP, like the UN SDG. But I would rather say that the one physical point China and US could collaborate and still collaborating is technology. Technology. People talk about technology wars like the small yard, high walls that while US is practicing. But indeed, you cannot stop the spread of technology and science and technologies and peoples. You simply cannot do that. I don't know how many US labs are counting on Chinese students are doing in labs full of Chinese students, while the Chinese still invite a lot of US professors to lecture in their classrooms.
Absolutely.
Right? So technology is indeed cross boundaries, cross borders. Simply, you cannot politicize science. Otherwise, you are killing yourself. This is important. If you're trying to politicize and barricade science, you are smothering your own innovation. You're killing yourself. So science and technology, unless there's indeed some sensitive issues, like indeed in the area of chips, which is highly sensitive in terms of military exposure, because it's natural, leading and sensible position in world technological structure. Other parts like bioscience, climate science, science of Earth, exploration of the space somehow. These things, which are going to be benefiting the entire humanities, will certainly be the potential area for two countries to cooperate. And indeed, we are cooperating. Because everything's connected with everything. Indeed, climate change is not simply an aspect over climate, over preserving the environment. It certainly has everything to do with politics, even with the military, right? So eventually, these two countries, despite being interrupted with one incident after another, will again reach out and reconnect with each other through multiple forms of dialogue, exchange, cooperation. So I don't have a really pessimistic view over the Thucydides trap, because historically Thucydides trap end up in war, in a civil war in Greece, because these two countries basically exhausted their resources of cooperation. This simply has no room to maneuver over. They have no choice but to fight. While China and US has a lot of options, to coexist, other than going into really sharp and no return conflicts with each other. Even Taiwan, some people mentioned Taiwan issues. I once, when I was a student, as you guys, once believed that Taiwan could be the most dangerous island on Earth. But eventually, I believe, especially following Chinese foreign policy for so many years, I believe rather that Taiwan might be the safest island on the world. Why? Doesn't mean that there's going to be no conflict. The crisis conflict is permanent in Taiwan. Ever since 1949, Taiwan is the island of crisis.
Yes.
But why, after 70 years, no war? And a lot of people died, actually, but there's no substantial escalation of conflict. Yes. Because both the Chinese on both sides know exactly how to play Tai Chi, how to
in political terms, I would say a war of attrition.
War of attrition, exactly. The two parties know exactly how to maximize their interests while preserving the status quo, while wait out, see what's going to happen in the future. A lot of Chinese, especially, I was reading this morning, the second leader of Taiwan, the Jiang Jingguo, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, right? Before he died, he democratized Taiwan. He said, "I might be a dictator, but I'll be the last dictator." He said that.
Yeah.
See, this is the wisdom of a Chinese who has been, regardless of Taiwan or mainland, but this is the wisdom of Chinese. He knows exactly how to follow the trend and wait for the change of things. It's like water. It flows and you run into the different courses. You know how to bend, you know how to flush, but you know how to wait still. And when things are going to change, your opportunities are. So I won't worry too much about so-called hot war or even an spillover kind of a conflict between China and US over Taiwan, because I believe when people are not crazy, they will find a way out.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. And it's been, I know you have to go. You told me that you have some event to attend.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for understanding.
Your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope my students have learned something here. And thank you for joining us. And the conversation is recorded and it would be available on our think tank page, CSSPR. Most of the students know that if you want to rewatch. And if you have more questions, you can write an email to us. We would answer your questions. Thank you so much. And Professor, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Asif, as always.
Thank you. Take care. Take care. See you.
Bye.